My guest today is Nicholas Haan, who works in the trenches of building great governance and helping people around the world to be able to think about ways to be able to support initiatives with impact, and is a deep ecosystem thinker. He was Singularity University's vice president for impact, faculty chair for the Global Grand Challenges, managing director for the Global Entrepreneurship Program, and today he is Singularity University's Fellow for Governance, which we will explore many of the facets of. Nick, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Is that they believe that those technologies or approaches can be transformative, how others can transform, especially in organizations, and also personally, how can you continually transform? What are some of these insights that can help you in your own personal life? So yes, it is a gift to me, and especially to be focusing on issues that are related to governance and impact. So I'd love it if you'd start by taking us back to talk about young Nick. What were you fascinated by when you were young? What were your curiosities that drove you?
Science. So I was a bit of a science geek in high school and college. Graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in genetics. And then I was on the track of going, either hardcore sciences or going into the medical field or whatnot. And then an inner voice just told me I need to break that cycle and kind of have some experience before I continue. So I joined Peace Corps. And that was really driven by kind of what drives me a lot is curiosity. In this case, curiosity, how other people live, what life is like outside of California where I was living. And so I joined Peace Corps, and that completely changed my trajectory. Even though I tried to come back after Peace Corps and joined a genetics lab at UC San Diego. In fact, I joined one of the labs that ended up being at the frontier of CRISPR technologies. Had I stayed, I would have been in that community. But then I got an offer to go back and work on rural development in Africa, and I was really drawn towards away from Drosophila, helping people and environmental issues. So that's what really got me excited and set me on a trajectory of international development. And ultimately now here I am working on trying to solve the world's biggest challenge.
So is that initial grounding in science? You also worked in climate science at NASA. You've had a range of experiences where you've been able to use science to be able to understand complex ecosystems. Does that connection to some of the greatest challenges in the world, does that give you a framing for how you approach some of these systems? Do you use scientific analysis to be able to look at ecosystems or to be looking at economies to try to help you to deconstruct the best ways to be able to help people to build a better future?
Absolutely. Quite frankly, I don't use at all my genetics background, other than I get fascinated when the likes of Tiffany Boer gives a great talk or something like that. But I don't really use that now. But what I do use is the systems thinking and the rigor, the cause and effect. I definitely apply that consciously and subconsciously to the work I do, and some of the big accomplishments I've had in my life, even though you wouldn't call them hard sciences, are definitely grounded in science. And the things I'm working on now are very much grounded in science. Even though you would think it's social science, it's a scientific mindset that values experimentation. It values rapid prototyping, values collaboration and multiple perspectives. So yes, it definitely influences my work.
So what was your path to come into the Singularity University sphere, especially in Africa? And how did you find yourself in the SU arena?
Yeah, it's really a story of twisted fate. So pre-SU, I had been working in the field of global disaster analysis, specifically global food security analysis. I had been working in that field for about 10 years, and right place, right time. I found myself having created what has turned into the global gold standard for classifying food insecurity around the world, kind of like a common Richter scale for food security, which has now been applied to all the humanitarian sectors. So I've also innovated it so all the humanitarian sectors have a common scale to understand the relative severity and magnitude of crises from place to place.
And so help people understand just sort of the dynamics of food security, just briefly. So essentially, We in developed economies, we tend to take food for granted. There's a supply chain. There's food that's always available. There are whacks to the system, sure, and there are supply chain challenges. There are definitely populations that do not have consistent access to food, and those are, I think, failures of modern economies. But for the most part, at a scale, we're not worried about not having food that could be put on the table. But that's not true in large parts of the world.
Right. So the areas where I work are places where a major disaster might have happened, a drought, a flood, a tsunami, conflict, an economic shock, which has typically left millions and millions of people acutely food insecure on the brink of losing their livelihood, if not their life. So that's where I get engaged, and the likes of my people in my profession get engaged to analyze, try to predict those if and when they're happening, analyze them in real time to inform decision makers on how best to respond to those situations. So, so think Sudan right now. So I also sit on a committee, a 5-person committee, which is called the Famine Review Committee, whereby using the system that I had created, which is called the IPC, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. It's a standard classification system that around 40 governments in the world use around the world. Using that system, you might ask the question, well, how is famine determined in a place? So they use that system, analysis is done, and then ultimately the Famine Review Committee, of which I sit on, looks and reviews the body of evidence, and we make the final call as to whether or not a place is in famine. So Sudan, for example, we classified famine last August, most recently December, and we're going to be activated again in the coming month. So that's the kind of like where there's a massive humanitarian crisis is the type of situation where I typically work. And I was working in that environment, to answer your question, right pre-SU. So I was, so if I can go to address your question there, unless you wanted to follow up.
Absolutely.
So
No, I'd love
back
to
to your
hear more
question.
about just how you got sucked into the
That's
SU
that's totally fine. Yeah.
ecosystem.
So how I got sucked into SU. So I was, even though I had done a lot of community-based work and national level work, I ended up finding myself at the headquarters of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, running a global project, the global implementation of this food security analysis system, and feeling like I was kind of at the top of my game, and I had innovated out enough for that, and I was just kind of doing my work, even though it was fascinating, really meaningful work. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, have you heard about this place called?" This was in 2011. Have you heard about this place called Singularity University, which SU had only been around, what, 2 years at that point? They bring together all these entrepreneurs and to try to solve the world's biggest challenges. You can apply to be a participant there. So I did. I applied to be one of the SU participants in what was then called the Graduate Studies program. And I got rejected. So I got a rejection letter from SU saying, no, thank you. We've done careful, design of the class. They were basically designing the demographics of the class. And I didn't quite fit in. I understood that. I didn't take it personally. I said, that's fine. Wasn't really thinking anything of that anyways. 2 weeks later, I get a letter back again saying, hey, actually, would you come and be a teaching fellow at that program that we just rejected you from? And you don't have to pay anything. We'll pay for it. I said, well, yes, I'll go. But I'll only take a temporary leave of absence from my nice, fat, sweet job working for the UN in Rome, and I'll come right back. Well, there too, I went and effectively never came back. Within 2 years, I was the managing director of that very program that I gotten rejected from. And then within a couple of years, I was vice president of impact and faculty chair of global grand challenges. I loved it. It fed everything I needed, SU did, because I had been working on the problem side of global grand challenges, even though I didn't call them global grand. I'd been working on the problem side, whether it's education or health, environment, food. I have all those experiences working on the problem. I wasn't working on the solutions and working at scale and thinking totally differently about it. And SU fed me that mindset of abundance mindset that Peter developed and exponential thinking. And I just thrived. It completely changed my mental frame for my role in the world.
So I want to make sure we're explaining what the GGCs, or Global Grand Challenges, were. Our listeners, I'm sure, know that there was this first round of trying to build this global ecosystem of collaborators to focus on major issues called the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. And the target was the year 2000. The year 2000 came and went, but the problems still remain. There's still a lot of problems out there. And so that really spawned the process to build the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, which don't quite have a sell by date. However, that process did not really address some of the specific solutions, especially the ways that you could impact a lot of thorny challenges with exponential technologies. So SU's approach was to create the global grand challenges. So I want to focus on governance. You're SU's fellow for governance. To some people, it's a squishy topic, or it sounds like it's your grandfather's issues of laws and regulations for countries, or the burden of having all of the rules followed for public corporations. Explain to us what governance is, and what are the domains of governance? How do you think about the different places that we need to understand governance so that we can build a better possible future?
So first of all, governance is not government. So there's two different concepts. So government is what you might think of as your local government or your national government and the like. Governance is the way that decision making happens, the way that implementation happens, accountability happens for any societal group. For any societal group. And what's fascinating is our concept of societal groups is also changing. So that means that governance applies to nation states. Surely it applies to nation states. It applies to companies and organizations. It applies to international organizations like the United Nations. It applies right on through to your community, your local community, and even your parent-teachers association has the notion of governance. So governance cross-cuts all of that. And what's really interesting now is the emergence of new forms of governance, particularly digital forms of, not just digital transformations that enable those types of governance, but new governance models that are emerging because that are technology enabled. Something, for example, such as a network state, which is something I think we'll talk about more during the course of this discussion. So governance crosscuts all of that. Governance crosscuts our domains of politics in terms of like the way we make laws, economics, very hot topic right now in the US is trade and tariffs. That's governance. Governance is technology, how technology is used and what values and ethics are around the technology that we use. That's governance. So governance applies to sectors as well. So think that the health industry has governance. Education has governance. The field that I was telling you about before that I'm deeply involved in, disaster response, has governance models. So every one of those are also being disrupted through not only pressures to be better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, but also enablers, a whole suite of technologies which are enabling disruptions.
So let's talk about those technologies, because there's a couple of ways that we can think of exponential technologies influencing governance, and you talked about some new models. So let's start with blockchain. So essentially, a blockchain is just a set of ledger entries, but there are technologies that have been built using blockchain. The process of deciding who does what, the process of having the collaboration between different players, the process of compensating different people or getting value from the system, those can all be instantiated on a blockchain, right? So can you give us an example of some existing approach that leverages blockchain to be able to manage that kind of governance?
So blockchain, along with a few others, which we can talk about as well, is enabling much more efficient governance and also new forms of governance. So think digital identities, having a digital identity on the blockchain, having an asset, property rights to an asset which is on the blockchain and immutable, having a immutable trace record of financial flows through a governance system to keep track of corruption, waste, and fraud. If you want corruption, you want to reduce waste and fraud, which I know is a hot topic, blockchain is a great opportunity to keep track of that. So there's any number of potential use cases, and in fact, it's just exploding, the potential use cases. And then, as I mentioned before, there are new systems of governance which are actually being built on the blockchain itself. So there's two ways to think about this. So blockchain to make existing models of governance more efficient. So digital identities, keeping track of financial flows and the like. Then there's the idea of actually building new governance models, whether it's a corporation or a new form of a nation state, perhaps on a blockchain first basis, something like the network state.
So explain what a network state is. I mean, we're familiar with nation states, and especially when they have geographical boundaries. And even though sometimes the names for different things can change based on who is in control or in power, for the most part, it's based in geography, and there are edges to it that we call borders. What's a network state? How does that help us to think differently about just what a state is and a bunch of state-related actors and how they collaborate?
So Balaji Srinivasan really made this concept popular through his book called The Network State. And the insight was we have typically thought of nation state, we've been limited in our thinking of a state as being grounded in geography, as you just mentioned. It's a natural thing for us to do. We have our geographic borders, they may change. Ideology within those borders, actually, more or less geography stays the same, is the concept. Ideology can change. The idea behind a network state is it's built, number one, from the cloud. So it's designed on the cloud. It's designed to be a digital first state. And it's designed to be built not necessarily not around geography, but around culture and shared moral values. So communities of people who get together with the same passion around cultural concepts or moral value concepts get together and form a network, a shared network, and they exchange ideas and value and create influence as a united group to be able to affect change in ways they might want to affect change. And it's also very much akin to being mission driven. So a network state typically has a mission. Now that said, what's interesting, if you look at the book carefully, the end state of a network state could very well be a geographic state. But the starting point actually is digital. It's shared culture or moral values. It's that first. And that's why I mentioned states being built on the blockchain. So being built on the blockchain enables new currencies. The breakthrough thought was, well, we can also create new states. And that then has a few intermediary steps along the way towards potentially becoming a physical place. Intermediary steps might be meetings or pop-up communities that get together in a part of the world that all share certain values around maybe innovation around blockchain is an easy example, but it could be something else too. Or it might be a new, increasingly popular concept is chartered cities. So cities which are chartered with a particular mandate. But the idea is they don't necessarily have to become physical spaces, but they could eventually in the future become physical spaces.
We actually have an example in this era where there is an existing state that is actually turning into a digital state. Tuvalu, which is being afflicted by sea rise, may not exist as an island nation in just a decade or two. And so they are laying the groundwork to become a network state. They're trying to redefine what it is to be a Tuvalan if you are not in the physical location that was Tuvalu. And so they're trying to think of themselves as being this completely digital state and still having the social cohesion between their citizens so that they can continue to think of themselves as a state even when they no longer have that physical geography.
Right. That's a fantastic example. You see similar concepts amongst refugees. Refugee communities start to have these nascent networks amongst them, which are kind of prototype nation states. Although Tuvalu is a nation state now, becoming a network state, you see that emergence of networks of people who want to have that common identity, shared culture, shared purpose, shared values, and don't necessarily have to be bound by geography to have.
So I want to talk a little bit about your current work and where you are. So you're in Tanzania, a country of about 66 million on Africa's east coast, bordered by 8 different countries, including Kenya and Rwanda. It's nearly 1 million square kilometers, if I'm remembering right, about the size of British Columbia, maybe half again as big as the state of Texas in the U.S. And you're in Dar es Salaam, which is a tiny little city of about 8 million people, about the size of Houston, Texas. But you're working on an innovation city in Tanzania. So tell us about that project. Tell us why you're in Tanzania in the first place. I'd really love to understand just what it is that drew you about the country. But then tell us about that innovation city project.
Okay. Well, what is going to sound kind of trivial, but it's true. After having traveled throughout Africa, if not and the world, I really found Tanzania to really be the most special place. I really fell in love with it. But really what drew me here, it sounds trivial but true, is sea kayaking. So I'm a sea kayaker. I like to do expeditions, sea kayaking, big expeditions, typically things that have never been done before. And I wanted to pick the perfect place for sea kayaking, and I did in Zanzibar. So I bought a plot of land there about 20 years ago, and specifically for awesome sea kayaking around the islands and mangrove forests, et cetera, et cetera. I know that sounds trivial, but that's what got me here.
Absolutely.
Now, and because of my work at Singularity University, being a fellow, and working, I work as a consultant for the United Nations. I'm able to live anywhere, so I'm place independent. So I live in a village, and I can do my work from there. But in the course of actually a couple of years ago, I was asked to give a talk at a senior government meeting in Zanzibar on digital transformation. So bringing out my best SU sort of armory of mental models and exciting visions of the future, I gave a talk. Afterwards, I got approached by a couple guys who said, hey, we want to set up a Digital Economy Advisory Council for Zanzibar, and we want you to be the chairperson of it. Okay, this gets interesting very fast. So I dove into that, and I started really advising the government on all things digital transformation. Government services, payment processing, education, health, et cetera, really thinking about how to innovate from within the existing government systems. And then a whole new opportunity came up, and a international company, I can't name the name because we're still in a sensitive stage of the negotiations. Basically, I got connected to this company, and they are in the technology city building business and innovation business, but they do it with a particular angle around regulations. And it's as if it's geography independent. They can do this any place where the existing government allows regulatory frameworks to be enabling towards business, technology, and innovation, not constrictive. And it's not to say there's none, say no guardrails and the like, but I think what we find right now is too many restrictions around regulation, not thinking about regulation as a comparative advantage for governments to be able to offer to businesses. So what this company is doing that at scale to build a whole new city, and basically providing governance as a service. So governance as a service model where there can be competing models of governance within the city that best meet the needs of the innovators. So the sectors that are in the city. So drone company might need certain types of governance systems that best enable innovation. Longevity sector might need a different set. So rather than a one size fits all, this city approach is governance as a service for innovators to come in and create new models of governance, and the ones that are successful, the ones that will thrive.
So help me understand how that works practically, right? Because many countries, not just in Africa, but all around the world, many countries have histories. They've got laws and regulations, layer after layer of them. They've got often big organizations that, such as utilities, that are government sanctioned monopolies. There are all sorts of rules about people entering into their markets that put friction on it so that they have control and can bias towards their existing producers. And so many countries have that sort of layer after layer of laws and regulations and restrictions. And then along comes an innovation city, and you need these flexibility. So is this like a rule-free zone, or is it what gives the license for people to come up with
Yes.
different governance models and to not run into these barriers of a lot of the existing rules and regulations?
So the idea is to set up a special economic zone, and for that special economic zone to be constitutionally allowed, so create legislation that allows this zone not to operate independently of the sovereignty of the country. That's very important. So it's not to operate independently of land laws or civil society laws or immigration laws. But when it comes to regulations around business, technology innovation, entrepreneurship, taxation, incentives, to create a set of regulations that operate in this zone, in this special economic zone, and are allowed to thrive in this zone.
So our colleague in the Singularity ecosystem, John Hagel, often talks about strategies on the edge, that
Yes.
innovation at the core is often very hard to do. But if you can create these safe spaces off on the edge zone where you can innovate, that allows you to create much more new approaches to solving problems. And then the possibility is that eventually that spreads and infects the mothership. It has an influence on the innovation processes that eventually transform the core. Do you think that's one of the hopes for a program like that, where you create this zone and then those practices may eventually spread throughout the country?
Definitely, that's part of the theory of change of these. So to create these safe spaces for innovation to flourish. And the idea is not only will the innovations and new business models and inventions emerge, but the whole governance models, if they work there, can then spread to other parts. So Zanzibar stands to benefit tremendously if this is successful. Tanzania, East Africa, all of Africa, quite frankly. There's a concept that I'm kind of playing around with right now, that I think I shared with you earlier, called the paradox of governance versus resources to create prosperity. And I'm raising it because it touches on the point you were just making. A lot of places have layer after layer after layer after layer of regulations and vested interests and the like. And it stifles innovation and entrepreneurship. Necessary. So I'm not a total chaos kind of person when it comes to things. Guardrails are important, but we've created environments where there's so many regulatory hoops, and corruption is also a huge issue here as well. My observation with this paradox is we think of countries that are going to be the most prosperous countries as those who are resource endowed. They got gold mines or diamond mines or a long coastline or even a booming population or some sort of resource endowment around oil or gas or something like that as really the most potentially prosperous countries. The paradox here is for the economies of the future, those are all immutable resources, meaning your country has those or not. You can't just create a gold mine on your country if it doesn't exist. It's an immutable resources. For countries in that situation, but especially for countries who weren't blessed with those resource endowment, the paradox is when it comes to governance, whether it's regulations or whether it's corruption, those are all mutable. They can be changed and they can be changed fast. They can be changed with different mindsets. They can be changed with different governance models that demand accountability and more positive inclusivity and positive visions for the future. The point is, as problematic as they are, and they are, corruption stifles the global economy. Regulations stifle entrepreneurship. They're actually changeable. And this is what we kind of have to recognize is we don't have to accept inefficient governance systems that were born out of the last millennia or so. We can think afresh at governance systems. And for countries, if you're out there working with a country somewhere that is not resource endowed and yet has an appetite to a bigger aspiration for prosperity, to me, the easiest selling line is let's get together and think differently about regulations, stamping out corruption, better governance models. Because it's governance which is actually mutable. We can change it fast, and we can create prosperity around that. A close colleague and friend of mine, a person named Magat Wade, Senegalese entrepreneur and thought leader in this space, has really highlighted the linkage between African prosperity and the lack of and terrible governance. So if governance can be solved, Africa will be on a track towards incredible prosperity because its demographics are there, its resources are there, et cetera. But it's been, for whatever historical reasons or any number of fascinating reasons, we can have another podcast on that, it's been stymied by bad governance. And that is changeable. It's changeable with different mindsets to empower entrepreneurs and innovation and risk taking and inclusivity. You don't have to have a gold mine to be a rich country. What you do need is good regulations.
So I think there's a couple of inspirational examples we can point to, that smaller countries, but countries that have had limited resources and gone through pretty substantial transformations. You look at Singapore, which was one of the poorest nations in Southeast Asia and now has a greater per capita GDP than the US does. So people make more money generally on an average basis than they do in the United States. And then the approach that Estonia took to basically hit the reset button and come up with a digital infrastructure that would reduce a lot of the friction for its citizens to do things like starting companies and paying their taxes and those sorts of things. In a very short period of time, just completely transformed the infrastructure of the country and provided just much more access to opportunity. So it's doable. There are inspirational examples. The challenge is always how you get from there to that possible future. And it sounds like especially the innovation project that you're talking about is one of the strategies to be able to do that. So help me understand how some of these insights map to people in organization. Organizations also have histories and they've got a lot of rules. They're governed by rules and regulations. Organizations have some type of group that's leading the organization, and that can continually transform over time. What are some of the insights that you can give people in organizations to be able to think about this sort of new approach, a new mindset around governance and flexibility, and how can they leverage some of these insights in making their organizations more adaptive, making them better for the workers, making them more anchored in the purpose of the organization and the kinds of positive impacts it can have in the world?
So I think a number of mindset shifts need to happen. So one is to recognize that cooperation has been the key to Homo sapiens success evolutionary. Cooperation. So anything we can do to enhance cooperation, whether it's at the nation state or within an organization, the better. And that might mean not necessarily throwing out the old hierarchical models, but enhancing cooperative clusters within that, embracing digital technologies and new forms of digital governance. That can happen within a corporation as well, ensuring that the technologies that are used are value aligned, getting used to thinking in systems, not silos. So to think across systems, because governance is not a law or legislation, it's rather a system. So whether it's a corporation that has a system of governance from producing a product to selling a product, from the various people who work within the organization, to think that as a whole and to allow for the free exchange of ideas and value across the various elements of that whole.
And I think you gave us a little bit of sort of the framework when you were talking earlier about that there's a process for making decisions, there's a process for taking action, and then there's a processes for accountability. And that's an organization. You have all those processes in place. And then the question is, can you leverage some of these newer insights that you're talking about? Can you leverage exponential technologies? And can you rethink those processes of decision making, taking action, so that the organization can continually be adaptive in a world of exponential change? So one of the topics that, as you can imagine, people who lead organizations around the world ask me to address is, okay, so we'll add AI. So now what does AI do to governance? Are we going to have AI board members? Are we going to have AI representatives from government that are watching our actions to make sure that we follow rules and regulations? Or what are the ways that you think of artificial intelligence and the whole basket of machine learning and other technologies, what are they assets to be leveraged by the organization? Will we see, will it be likely a possible future where we'll see more and more personification of these tools so that people plug them in into the governance process? And would that possible future be good for humans or less good for humans?
Well, maybe just to zoom out a little bit, another concept I like to think of it is the electrolysis of governance. So
Okay, explain that.
those of us, for those of us in the Singularity University community, Peter Diamandis, around circa 2010, wrote this breakthrough book called Abundance. The Future is Better Than You Think, I think was the subtitle. And the whole concept of that was based on the example of aluminium. Aluminium used to be an extremely scarce resource, difficult to extract, such that Peter used to say that at king's banquets, they wouldn't put fine silver or gold as forks to represent wealth. They would put aluminium forks and knives to represent wealth because it was so hard to get. And then along comes electrolysis, this chemical process whereby we can extract aluminium extremely cheaply. And aluminium, you pull out a sheet, you crumple it up, and you throw it away. It's that cheap, unfortunately. So the idea between the electrolysis of governance is governance, global governance. The administrative cost of global governance, just from a nation state perspective, costs around $2 trillion per year. $2 trillion per year. It's an extremely expensive commodity, if you will. Commodity. So if you think about the cost of administering global governance for nation states, just that alone costs $2 trillion per year. That's the cost of governmental services, not the services they provide, like health and education and security and et cetera, but the cost of running governments around the world costs $2 trillion per year. And not only is it expensive, but it's super inefficient. Think about how long it takes you to get a license to open up a business or something like that. So my idea around the electrolysis of governance is how to use technology to radically make government, not just to make it cheaper, more efficient, and more effective. And AI, sensors, and blockchain technologies, along with others, are that secret sauce of the electrolysis of governance.
So give me an example of how those could play together.
So AI in the form of chatbots to take someone through how to register a business, or AI on how to think strategically about policy initiatives and the cost benefits and the trade-offs of a certain policy initiative. AI to think through, to manage our electric grid system, to make sure that it's operating most optimally. Sensors to detect fluctuations in our electric grid system, sensors to detect the flow of applications for services and to detect how efficient we are or not, and blockchain to put that whole system on an immutable chain, a digital ledger, so that we can keep track, so that we can have unique identities, so that we can have unique personal identities, but also unique identities for property rights and the like. Those three together I call the electrolysis of governance, because used appropriately, even with our existing models of governance, not going to the new emerging digital models of DAOs and network state, which is there, but even just using our existing models can make those models of governance much more efficient. When I see what's going on in the United States right now, it's kind of a slash and burn technique to reduce costs, and I'm all for reducing waste and fraud. It's not what I would rather see is a strategic implementation of these breakthrough technologies to make our governance services better, faster, cheaper, more efficient. This is, I feel, inevitable, and the reason why it's inevitable is because there will be a global competition for who can provide better governance services. And people and companies will go with their feet. They'll go to these places, whether it's a city state. I know our colleague Paul Saffo talks about the rise of city-states in the future, whether it's city-states who have this figured out, or nation-states who have this figured out, or special economic zones who have this figured out, or network states who have this figured out. People will naturally go to where governance serves them best. And it's less expensive. Again, $2 trillion of the global economy is used just administering, not providing the services, administering services. And so people will go. So there'll be a competition, I think, and that's why I'm hopeful. is because these technologies are there, but they will offer better services. And whether you're a company, because you're going to have to compete as a company as well. So if you're a large Fortune 500 company and you're not looking at governance with this electrolysis of governance approach, how can we rethink everything we've done now, rethink it with these technologies in mind to make it more efficient? If you're not doing that, someone else is. Their widget that you're making and the widget that they're making is the same widget, but they're making it in a much more cost efficient and time efficient manner. Who wins the race? Not who has the best widget. It's who does it more efficiently and faster and cheaper. That's going to be the competition in the future. That's why governance is truly is not just a global grand challenge, but a huge opportunity to be successful as a business or as a society.
So I want to urge listeners, I think that one of the greatest things that you're recommending to them is it's a mindset shift. And to be able to start this process of just thinking through, like, how might we? Many people tend to look at their organizations, for instance, and just think, oh, we've got calcified decision-making processes and it takes forever to get anything done and there's no way we can ever influence that. But what you're talking about is that the organizations that are going to be successful in a variety of possible futures are going to be the ones that are most adaptive, that are ones that are going to have the best information. They're going to be the ones that are be able to continually pivot. And they've got governance models that balance this management of resources with being able to rapidly and dramatically innovate, to be able to either take advantage of new opportunities or to deal with new threats. And so that's actually a tremendous opportunity, but it starts with a mindset shift where you believe that you can use a new approach to governance, you can leverage technologies, and you can start to experiment. You can start to dial down some of the risk of trying out some of these new decision-making processes, of making sure you have good information to be able to make good decisions. When you take action, you can model different possible futures. You can have foresight to try to think of the kinds of ramifications of different actions. And then you've got better data to be able to help you to understand how to keep people accountable throughout the organization, to make sure that that new process of governance is all creating value for the organization stakeholders. Is that a good way to structure that approach?
Very much so. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. And so I want to, as we, as we start to think about some of the ways that we can create these possible futures, I just want to ask you, is there a possible future of governance that you worry the most about? And how do we make sure that possible future does not happen?
So I do worry quite a bit on this. I'm worried that the emerging concepts such as the network state can create silos of the haves without the have-nots. So they can create silos. And it's already happening, but to wall them off, digitally wall people off from each other, as much as the digital world becomes increasingly important for us. So becoming digitally walled off is much easier than becoming physically walled off, quite frankly. So separating and bifurcating humanity into the haves and have-nots is very much a possibility. That can be solved through ensuring certain values are imbued in even the network states themselves, if they care about that, to recognize we live in a one world planet here. I'm also concerned that what I call the electrolysis of governance, those same technologies can be used for a very different vision than a inclusive collaborative society. It can be very much a top-down authoritarian society, which is absolutely empowered and enabled through those very same technologies. These are choices. The technologies are there, tools, just like fire, right? So they're there. It's a choice that we make for the world that we want to live in, and we're going to have to continue to, for those of us who care about inclusiveness, cooperation, agency, and the like, we're going to have to continue to fight for that to ensure whatever form that takes in the future, whether it's a physical-based nation state or a network state, you have to fight for that because we're already seeing certain signs, whether extreme visions of social credit scores and things like that, which can be very much top-down and controlling. In fact, some thought leaders like Yuval Harari even question whether or not we have agency at all these days. So we're going to have to struggle for that agency and inclusiveness in our governance systems of the future.
So we've explored what was sort of the motivators in the life of young Nick, past Nick. I want to talk about future Nick. As we wrap up, I just want to get your picture of, it could be 20 years from now, year 2045. Nick wakes up in the morning on, say, a weekend day. What does a day in Nick's life look like then? Governance show up. What is future Nick doing in the context of future governance that would inspire you today?
So I have a big idea that I'm in the very early stages of. This is the first forum I'm sharing this big idea with, and that is I want to be a part of creating a new network state. So as I mentioned, network states are formed around shared values, culture, moral values, and the like. One of the issues, and I mentioned that I have worked in the humanitarian field for decades on global food security, famine type issues, extreme humanitarian events. With the collapse of systems such as the international aid system, USAID, I know has been in the news, the draconian cuts there, which will have real consequences on many, many people's lives. Death is in order for many people because of those cuts. And it's not just the United States, but others. So the whole international aid complex is collapsing, which was at least superficially based on this notion of rich and privileged countries have a responsibility to help poor people, especially in times of dire need. That's collapsing right now. Question is what emerges in its stead? And I think the innate human desire to have an empathetic connection with other humans who are experiencing a disaster will not go away. This is something that makes us special. Right? If you want to ask, like, AI is going to come, great, it is going to come. What makes us humans special is this need to help each other out in time of need. So one idea I think is going to emerge here, and I want to be a part of it. In fact, I'm going to launch a podcast called Disaster Act Podcast to activate a community of people to become eventually, potentially, a nation state based around humanitarian action. So a collective of people around the world who work towards trying to help alleviate extreme events that have happened elsewhere in the world. So if you ask me what I'm going to do in 20 years, in my best case scenario, I wake up 20 years on that weekend and I'm taking the weekend off because I will have just worked an intense week being a part of this global community. We will have just activated the community on a tsunami that just took out another island like Tuvalu or the like, and the tsunami just happened and we've activated the community and financial resources are flowing over the blockchain. The political activists are now lobbying others to help a nearby country to take then those refugees. They've been activated to help ease suffering and pain of those people who've been devastated by that shock. And that'll be that last week's disaster. And next week coming up might be a forest fire in Portugal or a famine somewhere else. I think that's not going to go away, and the need for that's not going to go away. We have been outsourcing our moral responsibilities to our governments. And I think now, with this idea of a humanitarian network state, we can take agency and take responsibility ourselves and know that we are part of a shared community of people. And technology is going to enable that.
I can't think of a more positive note to end on than Nick's vision of a benevolent network state. Nick, it's been just a masterclass for me, just fascinating to get your sense of just how governance can help to change the world, especially enabled by exponential technologies. Thank you so much for all your perspective.
My pleasure, Gary. Thank you very much for having me.